Hey everyone, today for I guess it's a vlog, or it's a bit more of a like me dumping my mind and making a very rough draft a very rough attempt at putting down all the things I've been thinking about when it comes to society because well I kind of want to stop thinking about society for a while because I don't know, it's not really what I want to care in the immediate future, you know what? I just want to focus on like being more fulfilled in life and being less anxious and having more energy and so on. So I just feel like I just kind of want to dump my ideas in one video or something. At first I wanted to write like blog posts, but what I realized that writing is it's very demanding, right? It's demanding because I tend to have like a quite a high bar, right? So maybe I could lower the bar, or I could just do something else. And I decided to do something else, which is to just talk about it and make a very rough graph of the ideas in Obsidian. Obsidian is a great thing, as you'll see later on. Like you can make like graphs of things just like you could in other softwares, and it's a open source free software, so it's really nice. And you can also make like nodes that link to one another. It's really nice. So the starting point for why I kind of think quite a lot about society is from an individual point of view. At like how come we live in a world that gives us so much, and yet people are so dissatisfied and alienated from one another? Um, uh, it's not meant to be a Marxist reference, but even though you use the word alienation, by alienation I simply mean that people just don't feel connected with one another, right? Why do so many people lead lives they hate, and who is in control of society if there is even such a thing as people who are in control? So kind of question that came up to my mind because this question in particular, who's in control of society, it makes me think about like who even enjoys this society that we live in. Like, are there people who enjoy it? Like, because to me it doesn't even feel clear that the answer is yes, that there are people who enjoy this society, but maybe I'm wrong, but those the one and three are the main things I think about. Like, why are we so dissatisfied even though we have so much? And well, I have quite the network of ideas to think about. As you can see, kind of need to play around to fit everything. Okay, so there are kind of two ways to tell something, to kind of explain a set of ideas. Right? The first one is to just dump everything after you've sort of recollected everything and put them neatly into boxes and systems and all that, which is kind of what I'm going to do today. Another one, which is also kind of neat and has its strengths and in my opinion should always be combined with the first one, is to tell it in like a chronological order of your personal life. So you basically teach how you came upon an insight, basically, right? Um, which is not really what I'm going to do today. Today is more about like presenting my final. It's a very rough map, by the way. I did this in like 5 minutes because I know I didn't want to spend too much time thinking about it, but I will definitely improve it over into it. But it's kind of a rough current map of like all the things, all the concepts that I've seen in how society influences personal life. So the first thing I would start with, this is the starting point, is that society is actually a pattern of beliefs. It's not the external manifestation that we often think about, right? When we think about society, we think about money and the economy and um, everything we build in it, technology, cars, roads, systems, the internet, regulations, law. We think of all of those, and these are, for me, these are manifestations. These are external manifestations of the pattern of beliefs. So similar to how fungi, some fungi are, have offshoots on the ground, but most of the fungi is found in the groundnut as a type of spores, and the mushroom that pops off is just the the offshoot, the manifestation of onto the visible world, if you will. For me, society is a pattern of beliefs, and for something to exist, it needs to have some kind of mechanism to maintain itself, so to speak. A mechanism is like in a very general sense, right? So, like the only way that a rock can exist is if it doesn't suddenly disintegrate into non-existence. Right? A rock can exist because it's solid and it doesn't just suddenly disappear. And a society can only exist if it has ways to maintain itself. So, for example, it needs to, help humans survive. It needs to have, like, a certain consistent set of beliefs that don't change, from one day to another. It has to find ways to like defend itself against other civilizations and so on, right? So this is about survival in a very general sense. Trying to maintain itself, you can think of it as survival in a very general sense. So, um, human beings need to survive, and similarly, society needs to survive. It's sort of I don't remember what's the exact term. It's like a super organism. Like it's like it's like the bigger equivalent of an organism. It's made of organisms, which are human beings, but it can be it's seen itself as an organism. And so the key point that leads to from this is that for society to survive, it needs to accumulate power. So power needs to be the center focus of survival. Um, because if you don't have power as a society, power can be very simply uh, the ability to conquer other civilizations, right? So raw physical power is one type of power. There's also, economical power nowadays or narrative power. I would claim that even though we do not live in a state of physical warfare, I would say that we very much live in a time of narrative warfare. So this is another form of power, but power equals survival, right? So the only way you can survive is if you're good at uh, not dying to the other things that are similar to you, right? So the only way that an animal can survive is if it can run away from prey, or it can kill other animals and so on, right? So it needs to be powerful. And the key split, maybe I should have kind of made explicit, maybe I'm going to make it here, that power is not the same thing as truth. And that is the kind of the problem that we find ourselves a lot in. Our society is really powerful, but it's certainly not wise or good at dealing with truth or reality. Um, so maybe let's expand a bit on how come, or rather, examples of how much power society holds. So, a a tribe, like like a group of like let's say 50 or 100 people living in like a village sort of thing, a tribe could never manufacture things such as guns or tanks or computers or the internet or boats or nuclear bombs. A tribe could never do that. Not okay. First of all, simply on a matter of scale, right? It could simply it simply doesn't have the manpower to it simply doesn't have the manpower to manufacture those things, and the time and energy and intellectual uh, capacity, not maybe not capacity, but more like intellectual infrastructure, let's say, right? So science is an intellectual infrastructure, for example. It doesn't have the intellectual infrastructure to manufacture all of these technologies, and these technologies are clearly like incredible sources of power, right? But I think another way why a tribe could never really um, achieve that kind of power is because I think I think achieving that kind of power, up until now at least, in the way civilization has done it, it's very much done in a how to say, it comes from a place of like severe dissociation from other people, which I'll come back to, also yourself, right? And also like just from the world, right? Like the fact that we can see ourselves as people who can bend nature to its will, the fact that we see nature as something that is outside of us, that is part of society, that is part of our culture, and I think that's one really key component of the power that society can channel. And truth, reality. is that that while there's not really such a thing as separateness, and that is more of a selfish point of view. But I say that, but it's not like I've experienced that myself. So maybe I shouldn't say that so clearly and so boldly. But for sure, there are many ways in which maybe I could even expand truth and reality. There are many ways in which society is really not keen on um, listening to reality. So, as an example, I, I've never heard in mainstream culture the idea that oil oil depletion could be a reality, and that um, the increasing price of oil extraction and in general fossil fuels, which are the basis of our economy, basis of the energy we have, and as a result, the basis of our economy. I never had the idea that this could actually be severely important in our society, like this increasing price, which will lead to an increase in pretty much every product because we are so dependent on energy. I've never seen that argument being made, and my theory is that well, we live in a society of excess, and and it doesn't want to admit that this excess is not sustainable long term. This is my theory that why peak oil is not something that we talk about. Not because we actually have solved it. Like some people would say that some people would say that we have discovered new ways of extracting oil and so that. But to me those are just like accident accidental, like, or maybe not accidental, but like really remarkable ways of finding oil that we will never really be able to reproduce as much in the future. Like, it's not like we can just find new ways of extracting oil forever. Like, at some point, we'll simply run out, and in my opinion, it's coming in the next decades. But okay, that is another thing. But to me, there are uh, many examples where society is clearly not interested in reality, but I think making an exhaustive list would take a lot of time, but it's definitely one of the thing I to keep in mind is that society is not aligned with reality. Society is aligned with survival, and as a result, it favors power a lot more than truth or reality. So, what does this obsession with power and survival, from the point of view of society, right? If we want to sort of treat it as a super-organism, which I think it is. I think it makes a lot of sense, a lot more sense to look at society like it's its own entity. And it also explains, looking at society as its own entity also explains why individuals are so dissatisfied with their lives. Is because, well, as as negative as it might sound, in my opinion, society doesn't really care about individuals, right? Even though, like, naively, you could say that, how to say, like, individual society only exists because of individuals, but that is actually not super true. Because how to say, there's always like a sort of evolution, like evolutionary pressure going on with being part of society, which is that if you do not take part in this power game of society, building increasingly powerful technologies and all that, well, what happens is that you're very likely facing another civilization that is taking part in this power game, and therefore you're basically being overridden, right? You're basically being killed off the viable and existing civilization. So, in a way, it seems like this power game of society is kind of inevitable, and as a result, the idea of an individual that lives outside of society kind of seems a bit crazy and not really possible in a way. Um, because power is so dominating. I will come back to coercion, that it kind of tends to override everything. At least that has been the story up until now. It's unclear to me whether this will continue to happen forever, because the problem is that this obsession with power and survival, is devoid of reality, right? And when you when you don't take into account reality, well, you also die. So it's unclear to me whether game of power will keep happening forever. But you know, as an individual, if you don't care about it, well, it's not like you can really decide to not care about it, because otherwise you just basically get run over by more powerful super-organisms. Okay, so what does this obsession from with power and how many minutes are we talking about? 15 already, Jesus Christ, time goes quickly. Okay, so power and survival, what do they lead to in more of the individual? So from here on now, it's more about the individual. So I think to me it's pretty clear that like society is an incredibly coercive super organism. Like um, school is such a coercive environment, and I feel like the reason why people don't talk about it is because like a lot of people, obviously when people are out of school, they don't really want to think about school, and because we are blind to our own traumas and all that, and the word trauma doesn't even exist in the mainstream vocabulary, and I think the only reason people accept school and all of this coercion is because they're so disconnected from their own body. So coercion leads to trauma, right? Because you have to you basically don't have a choice but to go to school, for example, and to spend all this time being judged and all that. And all of this coercion it's so like banal, it's so ordinary that people don't talk about it. And so, like to me, it's crazy that like no one really seems to care about how much of a fucking soul crushing factory school is. Like I remember Visa talking about how school or maybe society in general is it's basically like a factory that crushes caterpillars, and then we complain that we have no butterflies in society, right? So it's crazy to me how uh, the amount of destruction on the individual that school and the other institutions similar to it create on people. So coercion is simply, in case it's not clear, coercion is simply forcing someone to do something, right? So, well, it starts with school, I would say. Actually, I'm pretty sure it definitely starts with school, and it keeps, but it's also a thing in pretty much every aspect of society, right? So school and work are the two biggest ones. You don't really have a choice but to go to school. And with work, well, the fact that you need money means that you very likely have to do something that you're not super interested in, right? Because money, money is how we survive in society. And yeah, this is basically the source of a lot of misery, for people living in society, right? That they feel like they have to do things that they don't want to, and in some ways, yeah, that's kind of what society is about. It's not about like quality of life. It's for me, it's mainly about the power of the super-organism we live in my opinion. So this is one aspect. So trauma is a huge one, and I don't know if I can do it justice, but for now I'll just talk about like the two other that uh, come from power equals survival. By the way, this my hours are super. I didn't really think much about that. I just kind of did hours. So maybe the core, like the how to say, the cause and effect links, they're not really that relevant, but whatever. So another aspect of powers is survival, and actually I guess it's more related to coercion really. Um, yeah, I guess it's more related to coercion, but okay. So it's decided this idea of identity versus self. So self, so who you are, cannot be judged, and it also cannot really be described without oversimplification with words. So in other words, it's non-verbal, non-descriptive, but the most important thing is that it cannot be judged. So who you are cannot be judged. On the other hand, your identity, now this can be judged. So identity in society is something like, your net worth, how many friends you have, whether or not you had sex or not, whether you're a guy or girl or, non-binary or whatever. Uh, just, your race, all of these, your skills and all that, everything that you can put into a list or that you can put into a resume or that you can put on social media, as a description, that is identity. That is not self. You know, whatever you can put into words is basically always identity. And the key point of the identity of and the key point of this distinction is that identity can be judged. That is a huge difference, right? Identity can be judged, and this is why society interacts with identity. It doesn't interact with self. And moreover, as you might uh, already realize, is that very few people are in touch with their self, right? People spend all of their lives basically in society, um, thinking of themselves as their identity, right? So feeling like they don't have enough, feeling they don't have enough money for some reason, or feeling like, if you haven't had sex at age, I don't know, 20, then you're a loser for the rest of your life, or feeling like you're not likable enough because you haven't achieved enough, or feeling like you need to go on a vacation so that you can talk about it and feel like you're being adventurous rather than, rather than just experiencing the holiday, you go on holiday because you want to have the identity of someone who goes on holiday, right? If that makes sense. It's a pretty twisted thing. So this whole identity versus self leads to a pretty big core, yeah, just, uh, just sense of not being enough. A pretty big source of misery is that you just feel like you're not being enough because you're judged so much all the time, right? And this basically starts with school, although many families might already start this. Although, so you start school at like 3, right? In the country where I live, I don't think parents would really be the type to instill that into you. But I think it really starts with school, honestly, the sense of not being enough, because you're being graded and judged and all that, and if a kid is quiet and shy, they're told like this is somehow a deficiency and not, maybe maybe instead of, maybe there being good reasons for not wanting to talk to other kids. I don't know. So yeah, um, the sense of not being enough, being judged all the time, it's really destructive on the side of the individual, right? And the other thing that identity versus self and coercion form together is like this consumer identity, right? So I guess, yeah, marketing is a huge one as well. I don't really know. There's so many things actually. I don't really know how to link them as well, but it is worth mentioning that marketing is also one. And what those three things combine is into is the consumer identity and the money trap. So the consumer identity is, well, it's one type of an identity, right? So it's not self. But what is even more egregious about this identity is that it's not even formed from your own experience. It's not even formed from within. It's formed from the outside. Just like many identities, actually, most identities are formed from the outside and not from yourself. So just to throw it out there, identity is not necessarily bad, right? The over identification with identity, though, and especially when it's not your own, right? Especially when it's like identity inherited from society or from marketing or whatever, that is especially bad. But I don't think identity is inherently bad. I mean, but it's more like the attachment to it and so on that is bad. So the consumer identity is this, yeah, basically just defining yourself according to like what you buy and what you consume, and consuming. By the way, consuming is not just about money, right? It's also about time. It's also about yeah, it's also about time, but it's also about, at its core, consuming is about beliefs, really. Like the only way you buy something or the only way you invest time into something is because there's some type of belief that you also consume. So the way I would summarize it is that the consumption of goods and yeah, the consumption of goods is subordinate to the consumption of beliefs. So you only buy something because you believe that it will give you something. And if you have that belief, it's probably because of an external source. It's probably because of marketing. Marketing, this massive, business of creating needs and then providing the quote unquote solution to that need. But the need didn't even exist in the first place. And And why do people why is marketing such a thing in modern society? It's because money is how people survive in the society. Again, survival is the main business of society, and it's very profitable, especially because we have so many things nowadays, right? Like, the main function of society before was a way to acquire a lot of food, right? Because it was the main problem of life. But as soon as food sort of became, not as much of an issue, um, well, in our modern world where food is basically a non-issue, we kind of have to create needs, as fucking silly as it sounds, because because that's what the economy needs. The economy is like the economy is the center of society because again the economy drives technological progress. So yeah, again, I didn't really put that. There are many things I didn't mention this, but money drives technological progress, and technological progress drives power, right? Because again, when you have a really massive economy, you can produce weapons and all that, which to me, in my opinion, is the main function of technology. Technology is mainly about survival. It's not about anything that people pretend otherwise. But to me, that is the main function from society's point of view, at least, right? Maybe for individuals, technology can certainly increase their life, but I think it's more kind of accidental more than anything, or rather, it's more like a secondary benefit more than anything. So yeah, that's the consumer identity, right? So basically, just identifying with what you buy and feeling that and believing that those things can genuinely give you what was promised to you, that it can genuinely give you fulfillment and so on. And the money trap is not, it's kind of different, but I can put them on the same thing. The money trap is this loop that I described in the vlog about the 40-hour work week trap. And the loop is, the following. So first of all, you need a job to get money to survive. Right? That's usually the starting point of most people's lives. Uh, you know, some jobs are much better than others, right? So some people are self-employed, or some people can like remote work all the time, so they don't have tend to tie to one specific location. So certainly, it's worth keeping in mind that not all work are equally bad, but most jobs in the modern world they kind of suck, right? So it's kind of another rant, but I don't want to get into it. They're not very fulfilling. They're very monotonous. They just and they also cost a lot in externalities, so such as your health, your time, and so on. So the starting point is that you have a modern job which doesn't give you a lot other than money, right? So it doesn't really give you fulfillment. It doesn't really like you're not really learning skills. You're very likely not meeting new interesting people. Although you can certainly meet people, but like I mean, are they really interesting on the other hand? It's the question. You're kind of doing the same thing all over again. So besides money, you don't really get much from a job. So that's the first thing of the loop, of the money trap. The second part is that on the other hand, your job costs quite a lot of time, right? So it's a 40-hour week for most people, not even including commute, which can be a huge part. It can be a huge amount of time, right? So especially because it's been normal, like people feel like it's normal to have like a 45 minutes commute to go to work, which means that you have a 1 hour 30 commute every day, total commute every day. Um, but yeah, so you don't have that much time left. I mean, you certainly have a decent amount of time if you like had the energy to use it, but the problem is that you're left with not a much of. The problem is that you usually don't have much energy left, but especially if your whole job consists in sitting around, and yeah, you just don't feel super energized, and so that is the second point is that you don't have much time or energy. And so as a result, the third thing that happens that what do you do when you have a lot of money but you don't have a lot of time or energy? Well, you basically spend to recuperate all of the things that you don't get from your job, right? So you don't get any fulfillment. You turn to like buying things to reward yourself, as what they say, or like to experience pleasure, or like to like experience something new, go on a holiday, go to a fancy restaurant, and all that, or like you spend money to like feel good, to replace the activities that you would feel good, which wouldn't cost money or but would take time. So, for example, activities such as uh, walking or being with your friends or meditating or reading, they could be much more fulfilling. But the problem is that they take time, right? And they also take efforts. And so when you are done with work, do you really feel like you want to spend effort and time? Well, for a lot of people, it's no, and so they turn to the things that cost money. And so this third point is basically that we use money to fill our needs because our job doesn't really fulfill it. And so the consequence is the fourth point is that well, you've spent money, so which means that now you need money, and so you turn to your job, and the loop is complete. So after you need money, you go to your job, and that's point number one, and so on and so forth. So that's the money trap. It's the fact that we use money from our jobs to recuperate from our jobs, and so we just get stuck in this trap. Uh, Fortunately, it's not like a super. It's not like it's far from a perfect trap. I mean, but it takes a lot of stepping away from culture and society and the consumer culture especially. Okay, I'm taking just a short break to drink water because I need to kind of chill because I've been talking quite a lot in a row. Okay, so this was this part. How many minutes have we been talking about? 31 minutes. Kind of, it's kind of been expected. It's probably going to be a 1 hour 20 minutes video. So, okay, so another branch of the power equal survival is mechanization. Mechanization of individuals, right? So this whole thing is mainly about the individuals, not so much about technology. So mechanization of individuals. You could almost say that the only reason we have machines in the external world is because individuals themselves are mechanized. But this is a point that I've never really developed much. But there are authors who you know certainly talk about these things. I think Lewis Mumford, or I think there's a great video by Hermetics. I might post a link if I remember to do it. But yeah, so mechanization in this case is about individuals, the mechanization of individuals. So from borrowing Gurdjieff terms, man is a machine, man is asleep. That's kind of what I mean. So man is a machine. So in other words, people just sleepwalk through their life. Okay, maybe this hour is not great. Actually, I'm not sure why I put it as from a consequence of power co-survival, but it's really practical to have individuals who just sleepwalk through life, right, from the point of view of society, because it means that they will just do whatever you program them to do. The same way that a programmer can tell a computer what to do, a society can program individuals what to do, and if they're mechanized, and especially if they're traumatized, right, especially if they're atomized as well. So there's also a thing I didn't really mention is atomization of individuals. So like the fact that people are so separated from one another, and so on and so forth. So the mechanization of individuals is, sleepwalking is another term. Maybe it's more uh, like maybe it's more evocative for people. And basically, people just do the same thing all over and over again, and it becomes very difficult to change your life when you're a machine. And that is kind of the point. Is that habits have a momentum to them, right? Like the more you do something, the more you will keep doing it. And so this momentum is very useful because society programs you very early on with uh, beliefs and what you're supposed to feel in those situations, right? The fact that you're supposed to care about the opinions of people, for example, what you're supposed to do in life, that you should think about like what job you're going to do, what house you're going to buy, what car you're going to buy, and so on. Never thinking about whether you wanted those things in the first place. And so society programs you very early on. Uh, and the thing is that when you're young, you don't know anything, right? That's the whole thing, is that it coerces you very early when you don't know anything. And by installing into your habits uh, and ways of thinking that have momentum to them because you don't know any better and because those things have momentum in general, you're basically kind of guaranteed in most cases that the person will just keep doing it for the rest of their life. As sad as it is to say, most people don't really change much once they kind of reach adult life, which is kind of fitting that we have this distinction between like childhood and adulthood, which to me was always silly that you would group up like 18 plus as one entire blob, because we're talking about 40, 50, 60 years of someone's life, right? And when you group that into one blob, it's kind of a but actually, when you think about it from society's point of view, it kind of makes sense because most people they don't really change when they become adults, as sad as it is to say. So yeah, most people sleepwalk through their life, unfortunately. And so this is an aspect of coercion that I didn't really talk yet, and this is the idea of self-policing, right? So society coerces you, and that is how it works at first. At first, society coerces you. It forces you by, because you don't have a choice but to go to school. And it doesn't matter how, intelligent or how smart or whatever, or whether you can see through that, you're forced to go through all that. But then the coercion the external coercion is not as much present, right? So as an adult, you're not really like coerced explicitly to go to work. Like if you wanted to, you could leave, right? But there's the money trap that keeps you in. But another reason that keeps you in is, I guess, not so much in work, but like in other aspects of life, is self-policing. So self-policing is the internalized coercion. It's the internalized form of, telling you what you should do, or how you should act around people, and so on. Like for example, the idea that okay, there are not really good examples that come to mind about self-policing, but it's basically like any forms of like, this is not good. Like it's not good to play video games. I'm supposed to like, be informed and watch the news and so on, or I'm supposed to like care about what people say about what I do. I'm supposed to like uh, connect with people and so on, even though I might not even care about the conversations, so on and so forth. So self-policing is the internalized form of coercion. So doing things you don't want to, even though like there's no one watching because it's been internalized so much. And one consequence of kind of all of this, really, but especially those two, is that just general disenchantment from life, right? So it's kind of crazy, like how kind of gray the overall outlook on life is for humans, adults in the Western modern world. I feel like most people just maybe it's just me projecting, right? But I feel like most people have a very gray outlook on life. Like they're not really, they don't have any sense of curiosity or like enchantment or like sense of exploration or adventure anymore because again their life is so mechanized, it's so much about habits and all doing the same thing all over and over again. No wonder that that disenchanted, right? Like, and especially because they're so traumatized from their own body. Trauma is a huge point. I don't know if I can do it justice again, but my I'm gonna try. And so yeah, just people feel really gray about life. Like life just seems like life seems like I would say a chore or core, not really know how to pronounce it. It just seems like a list of things you have to do rather than an adventure. And this is really the self-policing aspect of it. You know, self-policing can basically be summarized as like feeling like life is just a series of to-do tasks, except that the person who tells you what to do is more of yourself actually. It's more like your internalized self. Yeah. I think the reason why I'm kind of bad at coming up with examples of this is that I don't really do that with myself anymore. But I used to do it a lot. So it's one form of it is like telling yourself that you're stupid for making mistakes, for example. Telling yourself that you're bad because you don't get something immediately. That's a huge point, which is very much related to identity versus self, right? So just basically shaming yourself for a lot of things, right? We shame ourselves a lot based on how many friends we have, whether or not we had sex before a certain age, whether or not we are behind people. So this is society's clock. I'm going to get to it. Yeah, so much shame is self-induced. And I think it's more accurate to say that a lot of shame is perpetuated by ourselves. It wasn't initially caused by ourselves, but we kind of keep the wheel going, right? Because the wheel has been going on for so long in our inner world from the external world that we cannot keep spinning it, and it's pretty hard to undo it, right? But it's it also makes life a lot better. So yeah, coercion has two major offshoots on its own: trauma and the society's clock. So what is trauma? Um, well, my experience of uncovering trauma has been kind of the main arc of my life, I feel like. So the biggest, let's say, I'm not really sure what to call it. The biggest void of my life has kind of been manifested as porn addiction, right? So I thought that was really the main point of my life. Is that if I just, at first when I was really young and I noticed that my porn usage was becoming really problematic, I thought that if I just quit porn, then my life would just become great. Like I won't have any problem, and then everything would just be great. I was never successful at quitting porn. Um, I didn't understand it at that time, it's because there was something much deeper than porn. But that porn was just a middle symptom. Right? It wasn't like a top symptom, like external symptom, but because it was also perpetuating problems, right? So, but if a top symptom is something that can only that cannot make other things worse, but it's just an end consequence, then trauma is more like a middle symptom. So it's not a root cause, but it's in between a root cause and a symptom, if you would. But so I had this, I had this, I thought that like if I just stop watching porn, then my life would just be good because I was noticing all these problems in my life from watching porn, which is like the fact that I had images of porn while just being with other people, like being at school and all that. That was quite disturbing to me, and that was really when I started thinking, whether or not this is a good thing or not. Because at that point, I didn't really know of like anti-porn communities. They were not like super huge. I guess kind of, right? They were not like super huge, but they were definitely there on Reddit, for example, right? So NoFap was definitely a thing when I was thinking about that, but I wasn't really on it. And I don't know, like the few months I tried to quit porn, I don't know how many months it really. It just didn't work. Like basically, what I was on NoFap, it never stuck for like more than like 15 days. And looking back, I'm really glad that I had the intuition that this was not going to work because what I was seeing so much was that people would just um, relapse, and I don't like the word relapse these days, but that's that's for another conversation. But they would just relapse and they would reset the account and they would be like, next time will be it, right? And they would never really seem to address the root issue of porn addiction. And it seems like very few people were actually interested in understanding what is the root. And while for some reason, I don't know if I really searched for the root, but for some reason I kind of stumbled upon many things, and one of them is well trauma. What is trauma? The fact that the vast majority of people are traumatized and they are completely disconnected from their body and their emotions. It's really fucking scary to see it. So, what is trauma? So for me, trauma is let's just say it's an it's an old form of fear and overwhelm that your body hasn't updated to the current situation, right? So there was something in your past that triggered your body to go on into survival mode, right? So the two main responses that we know of in survival mode are flight and fight, although there are two other ones which are not as well known, but they are in the trauma community they're very well known. But when your body goes into survival mode or overwhelm mode, it needs to express the response. Right? So fight or flight. So fight is you fight the threat. Flight you run away from it. And the two other ones are freeze and fawn. So freeze is basically playing dead, right? So playing dead or making yourself invisible in some ways, or like so that the prey doesn't no longer attacks you. And fawn is kind of like trying to befriend your threat. So with animals, it's kind of hard to see how you could do that, right? But it's a very common thing in the human world, right? So people when they can't, you know, when they can't get out of a situation, they basically just try to like well, to try to keep it polite. They basically just try to befriend the people who might threaten them. So these are the four main responses to threats. The problem is that when the response cannot be completed or expressed fully, um, that overwhelm doesn't just go away, right? So this overwhelm is, some people would say, that's stored in your body, uh, which I think is a useful analogy, but maybe it's a bit oversimplistic. But yeah, let's just say it's stored in your body, and the reason why that might be useful for the body to like store threats, right? To to store threats that it wasn't able to deal with completely, is it's rather simply evolutionary, right? So the body's main job is to keep you alive. So again, that's the theme of survival. The body's main job is to keep you alive, and so if there's something that you cannot deal with fully that nearly killed you, you better you better have some way to like keep track of that, right? And that is trauma. That is trauma, basically, in my opinion. In my experience as well, is that it's basically the body's memory of threat, and um, this is very effective for survival. And the problem is that the world we live in is so different from the world that humans being used to live, right? And so trauma used to be a very useful response for humans to survive. And moreover, a huge difference between our current world and the world that hunter-gatherers used to live in, for example, was that there was no external pressure from culture, for example, to override your responses to a threat. So, for example, flight is about running away from the threat. In the culture that we live in, this is seen as cowardly. This is people would call you they would call you like a pussy, or you know gay or whatever, if you run away from threats. And this is a huge like this is a huge blow to the identity, right, of society, within society, to be called that. And so what happens is that a lot of the responses that would use in response to trauma and responses to threats, they're basically being overridden. So you can't run away from threats because it's seen as weak. You can't punch, you can't like harm someone because that's punished by law. And you can't really freeze because a lot of times they don't allow you to just it's not like you can just play dead and have your problem resolved, right? Like that's not how it works a lot of times. So a lot of the times it's either repressed or people have to like fawn or that kind of things, right? So basically trauma is about survival. The bottom is that trauma is about survival, and it's a body response, right? So it's triggered by the body and emotions and so on, and those are way more powerful than intellect. So it doesn't matter if you intellectually know that something is not threatening. If you're traumatized, you will feel threatened by it. So to give an example of my life, I remember when I was writing my master thesis just last year. There was my, I don't know what you call that, instructor, teacher, the teacher who was overseeing my work. At some point, he just, he was just reading my thing, and at some point, he just had a really big frown on his face. Right? I think he just, maybe something was too small, or he didn't really understand why I wrote something this, a certain way. And when I saw that frown, there was something in my body which just was super triggered. In other words, like my belly felt incredibly tense, and I felt it really difficult to breathe. And now for my slightly more, you know, now that I understand myself slightly better, my trauma especially, I can see that seeing people's frowns in my childhood was seen as really, really problematic, especially with my parents, because it basically felt like I would die. That's basically how it felt because the reason why childhood is the cliche thing that psychiatrists talk about in your first session, where like, what happened to your I never went to therapy, by the way, so I don't really know if that's true, but I think the reason why it's a cliche is because it's actually very true, because childhood is a very traumatizing time in people's lives, because as a child you literally have no reasons to defend yourself, you literally have no choice, and because you're not allowed to express the fear and the response, right, because we get annoyed at kids crying and so on, and we don't allow them to be angry and so on. We don't allow people to feel emotions in general. Well, that overwhelm doesn't go away. It becomes trauma in people. And an interesting thing to know about trauma is that animals also get traumatized, but the thing is that because they don't have the culture that shames them for expressing certain things, they release the trauma very effectively, right? So trauma can absolutely get um, released, and this is the whole point of trauma work: is to release the trauma, is to understand and then release it. But yeah, culture makes it very very difficult. And when you see as a result of people who are like incredibly, incredibly emotionally repressed, like it's incredible when you see it, when you see your own emotional repression, to see it in other people, and how so that this is one huge, quite terrifying waking call with trauma, is just seeing how emotionally repressed people are. The second one is seeing how dissociated from their body people are, because my form of trauma personally has been dissociation, right? So not feeling my body, always being stuck in my mind, thinking about things, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, and so on, being disconnected from the present moment. And this dissociation is so common in society. Like, people are completely out of touch with their own body, which I think is also another huge component of why obesity is on the rise. Or it's why health issues are on the rise in general. People are so disconnected from their body, and yeah, it's pretty crazy. And another aspect of trauma that is crazy to see is just how awful we treat children. Right? We basically don't treat them as human beings. We just treat them as things to command around, and yeah, it's quite sad, really. And so yeah, I don't think I did an amazing job explaining trauma. I really need to like sit down one day, because I don't think I did like the whole storing in your body thing is not really satisfying to me. But okay, but essentially, one way you can just keep track of trauma, right? Is with the 4Fs model, which is uh, again fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and to just note down what just note down the actions of people and what they say, and whether those things fit in the 4Fs models, right? So are they trying to like bully you? Are they trying to run away from something? Are they trying to make themselves invisible? Are they trying to befriend you, not because they genuinely want to make friends with you, but because they want to benefit from it, right? So these are the four main responses to overwhelm. And what you notice is that a lot of actions and a lot of conversations are actually in the realm of trauma responses, because people are so, especially socially, I think a lot of people are really scared actually of people. Um, and so the way they act is in a very manipulative manner. Like, by manipulative I mean, like, deliberately, not unconsciously rather, trying to get an outcome by certain behavior. So especially the fourth response, like fawning, right? So the most typical archetype of it is the people pleaser, the people who just say yes to everything, and they just repress their own needs, um, and they just try to do everything to make you happy, basically. These people, they're not genuinely friendly. Uh, maybe consciously they might try to be friendly, but like unconsciously, the reason why they act this way is because it's out of fear. It's out of fear, and it's out of a calculated response to get something from other people, which To me, that is not being friendly, but and that's not being loving either. But I think a lot of these people have good intentions, right? The people pleaser, right? I mean, most people I would say have good intentions, but when you're traumatized, that's just how it comes out, right? You just yeah. And so also I've also seen that a lot in myself, this tendency to like talk to people to get them to like me because I've been so scared and so insecure in my life because like I used to be made fun of just for being me, just for being Asian, for example, in school, and that was hugely traumatizing, way more than I realized when I was a kid or teenager. As a 20 something person, it's kind of crazy how much it has affected me up until now and still now to this day. So yeah, trauma is a huge thing, right? So another thing that I see myself is like the tendency to like try to hide myself from the world, especially from people. So in conversations, I tend to make myself small. Sometimes even like in a postural manner, right? Like sometimes it's quite literal, right? Like just hunching over, just trying to make myself a bit shorter and so on, and avoiding looking at people, for example. Yeah, that is one way of like that is one way the freeze response get expressed is trying to hide yourself from other people. One way the flight response can get expressed is by this obsession with, flight. Flight is not just running away from the threat. Flight can also be distraction, right? Because it is another form of running away, right? So flight can be distraction, and especially like internet distractions are the classic ones nowadays. It can also be business distraction, so turning to work as a way to distract yourself from emotional problems, relationship problems. Right? This is very common in man. Flight is very common in man, for example, and fight is like the bullying or superior tone that you might take in a conversation, or it's also like how to say passive aggressive as well, right? Like because this is basically how a lot of anger is expressed in our modern ways. To passive aggressiveness or irony, but because people don't really have the guts to be straightforward and to just tell someone that they don't like them, and so they just take this like irony and passive aggressive tone to instead express that because it's all unconscious, right? The thing about trauma is that it's all unconscious. All of the trauma responses are unconscious, and people's entire lives can be 95% trauma responses. It's quite crazy to see, especially in yourself, that your entire life can basically just be one trauma response after another. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, that was about trauma. I'm gonna take another sip of water. So, what is society's clock? So just move on to another one. What is society's clock? Society's clock is basically when the time of society overrides your own sense of time and your own priorities of time. So society's clock is clock time, right? And it's not just clock time. It's not just the idea that there is time independent of yourself and so on. It's also like the schedule of society, right? So deadlines, especially feeling like you're behind. That is really characteristic of society's clock, right? So it's not just that you know so clock time is simply saying that it is 3 it is 3 p.m. on a Wednesday on a 3rd of January. So this is clock time. It's rather innocent, uh just seeing it just seen as from itself. The problem is that society's clock is much more than just clock time. It's also like the feeling or like the idea that by the time you're 25 you need to do X, you need to do Y, otherwise you're wasting your life. Like that kind of thing, right? The just general sense of like hurriedness and like the idea that you just need to do something before your X, otherwise you're just this is society's clock. It's this mentality of just having through life, right? It's really a rush type of approach to life, like trying to get as many things done as possible until you die. Yeah, it's kind of in that vein, and it's very coercive. It creates a lot of misery. Like people feel like they are behind. Is the biggest manifestation of society's clocking to people's life. They feel like they're behind, and they feel like they're not working hard enough, they're not accomplishing enough, and so on. And it's related to again identity versus self, because again it's about identity. It's not about self, right? And yeah, and so again, trauma, identity as self, and society code, they all converge into this sense of not being enough because again it's only your identity that can't be enough. There's no such thing as a self that can't be enough because that's not in the realm of self. Self cannot even be described with words, so certainly cannot be judged or quantified. And yeah, it's it's not a pleasant feeling, but I've certainly had some experience even the past weeks of like FOMO, right? The fear of missing out and feeling like almost behind and so on. And it really makes you think like, what does it even mean to be behind? Like why do I even want to be on the schedule of someone else? Like when did I decide to be on someone's schedule? And things that you very likely never decided that, it's been coerced into you. It's been beaten into you that you should be a certain way, that you should do certain things. You very likely never agreed to those things. You very likely never agreed to like deadlines and so on and so forth. And which is not to say like something that deadlines are bad, but like the things that they're always pretty much always coerced into from an external source, right? So yeah, so dice clocks is basically when clock time is seen as more important than your own intuition of and your own rhythm, right? So another form of society's clock is, which I didn't mention, is exhaustion. Exhaustion, right? Just you work so much and you work at a pace that is just not what your body wants. And because people are so disconnected from their body and so disconnected from their self, right? It's not me I didn't mention, no relationship with self. Well, they're just exhausted, and it's yeah. I just my last vlog I talked about collective burnout. And I think it's a really really huge thing. Now I see it, it's like it's not just that individuals tend to be tired. I think it's that individuals are systematically tired, or yeah, systematically tired. Like it's a systemic thing. It's not just like that people don't know how to rest and so on. It's that the system makes us bad at resting and makes us bad at being in touch with our own time and own rhythm. And yeah, I think it's actually quite a huge one. I didn't really emphasize it much in my uh in my very short rehearsal before this, but like people really don't respect their own rhythm, like they don't respect their own sense of like when something is too fast and so. And you especially see that in learning in classrooms. Like the rhythm of learning in classrooms is like, in my experience, it's appropriate for like at most one or two people in the classroom. The other people, it's either way too fast for most people, I would say, or it's too slow for like a few kids. Um, the rhythm is completely coercive in classrooms. It doesn't take into account how some people learn. In my experience, people's rhythm for learning can be very different. Like some people can learn a lot very quickly, but then they need more time to like digest it, or like rest and so on. Where some people are more like more consistent, and it's more like they learn averagely, but like they can learn decently. Like they don't need as much rest as the quicker kids, right? So there's kind of this notion of like learning cycle, right? It's not just learning rhythm, it's also like a learning cycle because I would say that, for example, I'm someone who can have pretty huge bursts of learning and interest in something, but then at other times I also need rest and to just take breaks and so on. And so the way I usually work is that I usually have like several projects uh, that I work on. And to be fair, I don't think I'm super great at project management. So maybe it's just maybe it's just I do things despite my bad habits, so I don't know. But I would say that um, no matter what my specific rhythm is, I think this idea of rest is completely uh, swept over, ignored by society, and it's incredibly destructive, right? Because again, society is not the line of reality, and if you don't rest, well, you're gonna collapse at some point. So yeah, it's very sad. So yeah, what another issue that society's clock is, as you might have seen, as you might have experienced it yourself, is the obsession with productivity and optimization, right? So this is also linked with the sense of not being enough, which culminates into the obsession of improving yourself. So the keynote of this is, the term improving yourself is that it's very misleading, right? When you take into account identity versus self, because there's really no such thing as improving yourself. It's more like improving your identity, or like improving the things that your identity tracks. Um, and the problem is that there's nothing wrong with improvement, but the problem is that it very often comes from a sense of like feeling you're not enough, which I talked about in our vlog. I think the trap of self-improvement, and it's very destructive because like you know the biggest revelation that you learn when you step away from society is that actually society cannot give you the things you want. Very likely, it cannot give you the things you want, and the things that you feel bad for not having, they're not even that important. Like they're not even that important. The things that like society makes you feel bad for not even having. So in other words, like the set of things that matter and the set of things that society tells you matter, they tend to be rather disjoint. Right? Like there's barely anything in the intersection of those two sets. Um, in other words, you should probably just start caring about your own things instead of caring what society tells you to care. And this obsession with productivity and optimization. Again, there's nothing wrong with being productive or wanting to like be super optimized in one aspect of your life and so on. But like again, the main thing is like, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because society has coerced you to do it, or are you doing it because you've never thought about it, or are you doing it because you just do it out of habit, or are you doing it because you're genuinely interested in those things and you genuinely see the value in being productive and so on. So the point of all this, right? The point of all this is really to live a deliberate life. It's not about like it's not about like trying to be against society or whatever. It's more about living your own life, and usually in my experience, living your own life is very likely against society's current and how it works. But if it but when those things are aligned, right? When those things are just the same, then there really is no reason to just do the opposite of society, right? Doing the opposite of society is not inherently good. What matters is doing what you want, and that requires self-knowledge. Which brings us very nicely to this point. It's probably the last point actually I'm going to mention is the relationship with yourself, right? So maybe not even capital S. It's kind of a huge word. Just your own regular self, right? Um, you could say your ego even, right? So if identity is the ego that uh, society creates, and society kind of makes you believe that's what you are, then lowercase s is more like a more authentic ego, if you will. I believe there's such a thing as a more authentic ego. Like people really demonize the ego, and I guess there is some good reasons why. But like I think the more important thing to address first is really to kill the super ego, right? Like people talk about killing the ego, but I think it's more important to first talk about killing the super ego. So the super ego is the thing that comes before the ego, chronologically, which is basically the societal program. It's basically the societal program and everything you believe, you're supposed to do, and feel ashamed for not doing or for not being a certain way. I think this is far more toxic than the ego, but because I think like I would say the first step for me is more like building a healthy sense of self, and then maybe if you are interested in spirituality and all that, yeah, and then maybe yeah, see if the death of the ego can improve your life, or if it's something that resonates with you, whatever. But for me, it's much more important to first focus on like developing a healthy ego and just keeping the super ego in check basically, and to just stop living based on other people's beliefs and telling what you need to do. And the no relationship with self, the reason why society's clock is linked to that is because I think a lot of reason why people don't really spend time with themselves is because they're so busy doing other things, and also because they're so afraid of themselves, so it's trauma and all that. They basically just never have time to rest. They never have time to self-reflect. They never have time to think about their own life or to think about life. And it's really a huge trap, right? This whole trap of like busyness and constantly doing things and just constantly running after problem and problem, right? Because like people say that people say that like life is about problem solving and all that. To me, this is complete bullshit because a problem is something where you can identify the paths and like where you need to go to and so on. So in other words, the only way you can have a problem is if you know where you're going. But the problem is that this is not how life works. You don't always know where you're going in life. And that is not a problem, that is an exploration. An exploration is very different from a problem because in a problem you at least know when you're making progress, but in an exploration you don't know when you're making progress, right? So for example, um, being tired, that's a problem, right? So because there's something you can actually check. It might not be quantifiable, but it's still something you can check, whether or not you're making improvements. But like, um, yeah, just what to do with your life. That is not a problem, right? That is more of an exploration, and it's something that is very likely going to change a lot over the course of your life. And whatever answer you come up with now, which might be satisfying, might not be the answer you have in the future, right? So it's not a static question. It's the 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 problems there are more static questions, whereas the explorations they are more about unfolding organic questions, if you will. And yeah, I think it's fucking bullshit to say that life is just about solving problems. Um, I think like the people who say that just they're not really living the life they want. But again, I don't really know those people, so I don't know. So yeah, um, huge job, right? To just be busy all the time and to never have time to self-reflect, and it just makes me wonder, right? Why do people not spend time with themselves? Like, why do they not? Uh, like the way it started for me was journaling, which is kind of crazy that it all started from just that simple habit of just writing for talking to myself through writing, basically. To me, journaling is as simple as that. You just talk to yourself through writing, and you just are as honest as possible, and you just say what you see in yourself. And obviously there are always things that you don't see in yourself, right? There are always blind spots and there are always unknown unknowns, but at least you can always make the effort of being as honest as you can. And it really makes me think, why are people so afraid of being with themselves? And I think society instills into people a sense of like that you are not important, like that the economy, for example, is more important, like, or like the universe. I remember seeing a tweet from Neil deGrasse Tyson this morning. Jesus Christ, it just made me cringe so much. The tweet was something like, the universe doesn't care about your fears or your beliefs and so on. It's like, to me, this is so fucking hilarious. Like this is such a good example of like this mindset that like just because something is bigger, that it's somehow more important, which to me is complete bullshit. Like, why Why should I care about like the observable universe, which is made of like things that are barely. I don't know. I guess stars are kind of interesting and supernovas are interesting, right? But I personally care a lot more of human beings than size. Like a star might be really big, a planet might be really big, but it cannot think or be creative or like feel or like you know be there for you when things are difficult. Like human beings are small in physical size, but that doesn't mean that they're unimportant. That's just I mean that's just a worldview. That's just a way of looking at it. But I don't agree with at all that size is related to importance. And I feel like there's kind of this implicit sense, right, in society that individuals are not that important, maybe, that your life is not worth studying or examining, or, you know, yeah, maybe it's kind of worth writing about, you know, sense that individuals are not important, especially that yourself is not important. And it's a very destructive, it's very destructive, and to me, it's completely wrong. It's not even true. It's certainly not useful. It's not even true. Um, that individuals are not that important. And I think this might be a big reason why people don't really study themselves, right? Like, like people, when you ask people what they study, I always, I don't think I've ever had the guts to say it, but I feel like, if I were to like, um, be more with people I was more interested in talking to, and so on, I think I would generally just say I'm interested in studying myself because really, I love studying other things, I love like mathematics or art or like you know, learning about history, learning about society, learning about psychology and all that. Those are really interesting, right? But I think I really like learning about myself personally, and it's something that you would never hear. You would never hear that. Um, I just thought about another thing I know mentioned, like negativity, drop of negativity. But yeah, there's a lot of things to mention about society. It's not like I can cover everything. But yeah, you would never hear someone just say, no, I'm interested in learning about myself and all that. Like people would just think that you're some fucking role player or whatever that you don't really mean it. But I feel like uh, it's kind of hard for me to imagine what could be more important than studying yourself, right? So because the only way you can see reality is through your own self. So if you don't understand yourself, then there's always going to be a distortion of reality because of your own inner distortion, so to speak, right? So I feel like it just makes a lot of sense to understand yourself, and especially to understand your emotions and your body, trauma, because those are so misunderstood and so, I think the worst thing about society, it's also worth mentioning, is the illusion of knowledge. It's this illusion that we understanding rather. It's this illusion that we understand the world, like because of all our scientific models. It is worth mentioning that most people they just study other people's models. They never like derive the model for themselves. Like they never understand it themselves. They basically most scientific knowledge is basically just being like monkeyed by people. Like they don't really think about it. They don't really try to understand it for themselves. They just repeat it like monkeys, right? So but this is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is like the illusion that all of our scientific models and all that they give us, they allow us to understand everything about reality, right? It's not true. It's completely bullshit. The scientific models are really good at explaining some part of reality, right? Such as you know general relativity is an amazing model for understanding how gravity affects space-time, and this is such a genius model, right? General relativity is a genius model, but it doesn't change the fact that um, it is restricted to physics. Like you would never use general relativity to describe the economy or to describe someone's psychology or to right. It's complete. It wouldn't make any sense. And it seems like as a collective, we don't really appreciate how little we know. Like there's like this facade that we just understand everything, and probably the most destructive part is the illusion that we understand humans, that we understand ourselves, that we understand the human body. But it's not true. We only understand some. Um, we only understand the human body from some angles, such as very materialistic and cause and effect model, which is very useful. But it's very useful to understand the bones and the muscles in that way, or like the the different system within our body in that way. But it also leaves us very um it's very dangerous to think that these are the only ways to understand the human body and to understand ourselves, I think. And this arrogance of intellects, claiming that it just understands everything, I think it's very common in our modern society. It's a very dangerous thing. It reminds me of this quote by John Michael Gray in one of his posts. He said that you know knowing many stories is wisdom, knowing no story is ignorance, knowing a single story is death. So, in other words, what it's implying is that knowing no story is ignorance, but it's actually not. It's actually better than knowing only a single story, which I think is very very appropriate for not just our culture, right, and the worldviews, but also like models. So only knowing one model is really dangerous because then you believe that you understand everything, and it's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like when you only have one model for something, you believe that it explains everything because you are not exposed to its limits and not exposed to its limitations and all that. And so I think the illusion of that we understand humans is really, really dangerous because I think because in fact, in my opinion, we do not understand humans at all. We only understand what comes out of humans who live in society, which is a very small thing, right? Identity versus self. It's a very small thing. It's not the whole. It's not the whole thing about humans. Humans are very complex, very deep, and very and they're not utilitarian. I think is the to me. I think in my opinion, there's something very genuinely deep and authentic about human beings that is not utilitarian, but because we live in a utilitarian world, because power equals survival and it's the dominating force of our civilization so far, we cannot tend to think that humans are like these like hyper utilitarian machines always trying to optimize and get the most out of the environment. But I think there's something much deeper than all that. There's certainly a part of it that is true, I think. But I think there's something much deeper about human beings. But the things that we live in environments that don't really allow us to be in another mode of relating with one another, because the story of society, it's not society is a part of beliefs, and when we could say it also has a story associated with it. Right? The story of society is a very coercive one and utilitarian one, and because people were born in that story, they believe that's just how the world is, even though it's simply how our current society is. It's a coercive and utilitarian one, and it's rather sad that as a result, we kind of tend to treat ourselves and treat others in that way, self-coercive, you know, utilitarian way in ourselves and with other people as well. We're trying to get other people to do things for you. Yeah, so I think this is about everything I had to say about this whole thing about society. This is a very rough map, right? But still, I was talking about for 1 hour 24 minutes about this. So, but I'm quite happy how it came out. I could certainly have done a better job at talking about trauma. I'm not super satisfied with the models I've used. So in large part because I myself don't understand my own trauma that well, but I have a decent picture now. But yeah, I think that's about everything I had to say. Many straggler points that came up that are not really linked, so it's a very incomplete map for sure. But it's feeling nice to say everything I had on my mind. I think in the coming weeks I'm focused more on talking about, individual stuff, not really talking about society, focusing more on like slowing down in life, investing and enjoying life. So yeah, I think that would be more the focus. So yeah, thank you for listening if you made it this far, and I'll see you next time.